Okay, we're in part 4, chapter 7. Periodic observances. And we started with with Shabbos. Now, in addition to the prohibition against doing malacha, which we talked about yesterday, there are certain rabbinic commandments that apply to the day. Okay, let me give a piece of background. Here's a quiz question. Let's imagine that a person, Friday night, makes kiddush on a cup of wine, and goes to sleep, and sleeps for 25 hours. What biblical Sabbath commandment did he violate?
Honoring the Shabbos?
Oh, so that's what I want to talk about. Honoring the Shabbos is not biblical. It's rabbinic. Biblical. It's not deraisa. It's found in a verse in Isaiah, but it's rabbinic in authority. I talk about that separately. I'll talk about that when I get there. The meals and the fine clothes and everything else is all rabbinic. Shema is nothing to do with Shabbos. You do it on weekdays also. Prayer is something you do every day. The truth is, benching, you bench whenever you eat bread, Shabbos or not Shabbos. Truth is that if he makes kiddush Friday night and sleeps 25 hours, he has not violated a single biblical Shabbos commandment. Could that be all Shabbos means? So that's it? That's all the Torah cares about? This is a quiz question. You can ask people with black hats. Hey, everything else is rabbinic and nothing else the Torah cared about. I'm telling you now, I live from Rabbi Meisman, like many other things that I tell you. So now, in V'Shamru, we say that Shabbos is an os and a bris, a sign and a covenant. You imagine you're observing this guy, makes kiddush, drinks the wine. Boy, that must be tough wine. He's out for 25 hours. Do you see any covenant here? Do you see any sign here? You see nothing. Here, the Torah expressed a theme for the day. The day has to express covenant with God and be a sign. The rabbis created legislation to express those themes. So even though the official authority of the legislation is only rabbinic, and not always is that the case when you have a structure like this, but in this case, the authority is rabbinic. But the significance of those laws is that they give expression to its being a sign and a covenant. So you have to understand that they play an absolutely crucial role. So, for example, consider what we said yesterday. You can't turn off the lights, you can't cook, you can't. Now, somebody comes to your house for Saturday lunch, and you bring out steaming hot basin of cholent. Under any other circumstances, when would you have put up, let's say you're eating at 1 o'clock, when would you have put up that cholent to cook, that stew? 10 o'clock in the morning. There's a pressure cooker, you can put it up at 11:30. You tell somebody, no, this has been cooking for 18 hours. He'll look at you like you're nuts. Well, you see, I can't put things up to cook on Shabbos. I just don't do that. So I had to do it Friday afternoon. That's strange. That is strange. And it's meant to be strange. It's meant to be strange because we look at that and say, hey, something's going on here. Something that's not on the surface. And if, it suddenly gets very cold, you don't turn on the heat, Suddenly it gets very hot. You don't turn on the air conditioning if it wasn't on. Why not? It's uncomfortable. Sorry, on Shabbos I don't do that. So you're put in a position where normally you would do malacha, and you don't do malacha. That already is symbolic. People will see that and notice it right away, and you yourself will feel it. That these are the circumstances which on Thursday I would definitely have taken action, and now I don't take action. Two people are coming to your house for a meal. They're coming in order to meet. You invited them so that they would meet. An hour before the meal, you get a message from one, he's not coming. He's sick. No, that being the case, there's no reason for the other one to come. But you can't send him a message because you can't do that on Shabbos. So you're surrounded by this unique circumstance where your activities are forced to be different from the way they are normally. And that being the case, it has something of an os and a bris. Now, part of this is the meals, banquets. The holidays even more so, but on the Shabbos also it's banqueting. That's called honoring Shabbos. You're honoring Shabbos by having a banquet. That's not obvious. Why is it to honor if to eat? Especially since you're going to eat. You're going to have a fine meal. And I think there's something very deep going on here. The idea of meal, eating, in terms of the tradition, I'm going to give you just one sliver of it to give you like background. When you talk about the holidays, there's a difference of opinion between two Tanoim, I don't know, Rabbi Shur or Lezer, as to how you should celebrate holidays. Everybody agrees that the day of the holiday should have two features. It should have prayer and Torah study, and it should have feasting. Question is, what's the balance? One says always the balance should be 50-50, and the other says no, it shouldn't be 50-50. It should be 90-10. I'm making up the numbers, obviously. 90-10. Either way, 90% Torah study and prayer, and a little, nice food on the side, or 90% feasting, and a little Torah and prayer on the side. So that's the difference of opinion. But the Gemara says, when it comes to Shavuos, anniversary of receiving the Torah, there everybody agrees you can't do 10% feasting. That you can't do. You mustn't make feasting tiny on Shavuos. Absolutely not. But you need to have serious feasting on Shavuos. Well, that's not obvious. Really? Shavuos, Dafka? Why would that be a requirement, Dafka, for Shavuos? Tell me Sukkot because it has an extra simcha, extra joy. Tell me Pesach because you're eating matzah. But Shavuos, why is that? So Rashi says because you have to show that the goof, the body, is rejoicing in the holiday. Noach, it's good for the goof also. Okay, and that's what the goof gets. The goof gets the banquet. But why is that true? Why must the goof have that? And the answer to that, one answer is this: that when the Gemara describes what happened when God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, Moses came up the mountain, and the angels were there, and they were protesting. Why are you giving the Torah to these people? What's wrong with that? Well, they're going to mess it up. They're going to fail. And he who has the Torah and lives the Torah controls the flow of divine energy into the whole of the creation. You're going to give it to them, and they're going to fail, and we're going to suffer because they fail. Give it to us. We'll do a much better job. And it'll be better for everybody. For them also. So, Kodesh Baruch Hu said to Moshe Rabbeinu, answer them. And he said, they'll burn me up with their fiery breath. And Kodesh Baruch Hu said, take hold of my throne and answer them. Take hold of my throne and answer them. So he said, let's take a look at what's written in the Torah. It says, honor your parents. Do you have parents? Angels? Hello. Last time I heard, you don't reproduce the way people reproduce. It says, remember that you were slaves in Egypt. Were you slaves in Egypt? No? So obviously the Torah doesn't belong to you. The angels were happy with that answer. So happy that they gave Moses gifts. What is essentially his answer? His answer is that we live in the mud. We live in the bottom rung of the creation. You're much superior to us. Because Baruch Hu wants to have the Torah saturate the creation all the way to the bottom. If you get it, it won't go down to us. So they're happy because he's recognizing, in a certain sense, their superiority. But it's because we live at the bottom in the mud. That's why we got the Torah. So now, let's imagine it's Shavuos. And we don't have this decision in the Gemara. And somebody says, it's the anniversary of receiving the Torah. The Torah. I'm going to spend the whole day learning Torah and thinking about Torah and teaching Torah because it's celebrating the Torah. And of course, Baruch Hu will say, you're going to spend the whole day just learning and celebrating Torah? I'll give it to the angels. They'll do a much better job with that. No. The goof has to be involved. It has to go all the way down to the mud. It has to penetrate all the way down to the physicality. So the body has to be on board. That's the message of that Gemara, that Rashi. I understand it. So, when you talk about honoring Shabbos means honoring with the goof, not just with the mind and the heart, but the body has to be involved in the honor. The body has to rejoice in the. I'm going to go rejoicing in a second. Also, it's another subject we have to talk about. The body has to be involved. That's part of the way of you to honor Shabbos. The real emphasis here is not you should honor Shabbos. The real emphasis here is you should honor Shabbos. What are you? What are you? You're a soul and a body. That's what you are. The body has to be involved. That's part of what you do when you're having the feasts on Shabbos. You got a question? No. Okay. Yeah, okay. Now, another element of Shabbos, which you have to put on record, is simcha. Now, simcha, joy. When you look at the verses that talk about joy, you have a verse in the Torah, "V'samachta b'chagecha," you should rejoice on your holidays. King David said, "Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha." When you serve God with simcha across the board. It should be simcha across the board in serving God. Nowhere, almost nowhere, does it say. Well, let's try to be clear. Nowhere does it say that there is a mitzvah, a responsibility of joy on Shabbos. But if you sing the Zmiros of Shabbos, the word simcha is there over and over. Menucha v'simcha or la Yehudim. We talk about joy on Shabbos all the time. Where does that come from? If there's no mitzvah, no obligation, no rule, no law of being sameach on Shabbos, where does this celebration of the joy of Shabbos come from? And there's a Torah Tamima who says a real Hasidic word on this. And if you are protesting that the Torah Tamima wasn't a Chassid, you're wrong. He was a Chassid. Definitely a Chassid at heart and in spirit. You tell me, you listen to this word, you tell me whether he doesn't count as a Chassid. The truth is that there is a verse in the Torah, as understood by the Gemara, and really, the verse is pretty clear. There is a verse that does mention joy on Shabbos. It mentions it. I didn't say commanded, but it mentions it. And this is the verse that tells you about the trumpets, the silver trumpets, when to blow them. When should you blow the silver trumpets? And the verse is like this. B'yom simchaschem, the day of your simcha, your joy. U'moadeichem, and on your holidays. U'v'roshei chodshechem, and the beginnings of the months. Okay, now you have a puzzle. You've got Q, and then holidays, and then beginnings of the month. What could Q be if the order is Q, and then the holidays, and then the beginnings of the months? The Q has got to be Shabbos. What else could it be? in that order, of descending order, Shabbos, and the time that the verse's description of Shabbos is Yom Simchaschem, the day of your joy. So the Gemara says, Eila Shabbos. This is Shabbos. Okay, but what does it mean to describe a day as a day of Simcha without there being a mitzvah of Simcha? What does that mean? Here the Torah Tamima says on that verse, when the Medrash tells us that when Kodesh Baruch Hu created the world, and he finished the creating process, that is to say, creating new categories of entities. He finished that at the end of the sixth day. On the seventh day, Kiviyachol, he celebrated like a king who creates a palace, and when it's finished, he throws a celebration for his people who worked on it, the people who are close to him. God Baruch Hu celebrated the completion of the creation on Shabbos. That means there was joy above. Torah Tamima says, if your neshama is in tune with what's going on above, you will feel joy also, just because there's joy above. If you know a little bit about physics and music, you'll know what sympathetic vibrations are. If you have two strings that are tuned to the same note, and you pluck one, the other one will in fact vibrate. And if you have a piano, you can actually do this at home. Take let's say, a note C, press the key very gently, and keep it down so that you don't strike the string, but the string is not damped. Now go down an octave, where there's another C, and hit that key hard and let it go immediately. So you get a sharp sound 1 octave below. Well, the first overtone in a string is 1 octave above. And you'll hear the one that you've held down gently, you'll hear it vibrating. You'll hear the tone quite clearly. Well, that's sympathetic vibrations. Idea is your neshama is tuned to what's going on there. You'll feel the joy automatically. You just have to be in tune. You're not creating the joy. It's not a responsibility. It's not a commandment. It's not a duty. It's a reality. So Simcha becomes a very important part of Shabbos, and it's a measure of the fact that you're in touch with what the ultimate spiritual reality is. Of course, this is a cycle; it repeats every week. That joy is above every week, and therefore it's part of the experience of Shabbos every week. Then he says there are the holidays, and the holidays have a lesser degree of sanctity, which expresses itself in two different ways. Number one, the prohibitions of types of malacha is much less on a holiday, that you can cook, and other things that you can do that you can't do on Shabbos. And the penalty for violating the laws of the holidays is much less than the penalty for violating the laws of Shabbos. Comes out something which I think would be unique. I don't think you have this in any other religion or any other culture, where in a certain sense, the holiest day of the year, the most heavily stressed, the most stringent requirements, both in what you must and mustn't do and the penalties for violation, comes 52 times a year. Usually, the more holy a thing is, the rarer it is, the less frequent it is. Here it's not true. Not true. The fascinating thing about the Torah's, as a culture, the Torah's emphasis on having this to be ubiquitous. Now, there's another difference between Shabbos and the holidays, which is brought out by the blessing that we make and the special prayer that we say on Shabbos and holidays. Instead of having 19 blessings on the Shabbos and holidays, we have only 7. I'm not talking about Musaf now, I'm talking about the regular prayers. And the closing of that blessing On Shabbos, the closing is Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Shabbos. Blessed Hashem who sanctifies Shabbos. On the holidays, it's Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Yisrael v'Azmanim. He sanctifies the Jewish people and the holiday. That's interesting. Shabbos, the Jewish people aren't mentioned. Only the holiday. And if it happens to be that it's a holiday and Shabbos at the same time, then the text is Mekadesh HaShabbos v'Yisrael v'Azmanim. Sabbath, Jewish people, and the holiday. Somehow the Jewish people are always together with the holiday, and Shabbos not. So one explanation, and this is really on the surface, is that there is a gigantic difference between Shabbos and the holidays. That the existence of Shabbos was established in the creation sequence, and it carries out week by week without any interference or contribution of the Jewish people. Holidays aren't like that. Not only were holidays established later, when these events that took place I spoke about yesterday, but more than that, the holidays are pegged to the days of the month. How does the month start? Who starts the month? So if you know a little, you'll say, well, it's a lunar cycle. It starts when the new moon, falls behind the sun enough to be visible on a new monthly cycle. That's a half-truth. Not completely accurate. Yes, we do have witnesses who observe the new moon and come to the Sanhedrin to testify that they saw it. As the Sanhedrin declares that the new month has started, that is true, but they're not bound to it. The Sanhedrin can start the month even without witnesses, and the Sanhedrin can ignore the witnesses when they come, cross-examine them, their testimony is correct, and say, thank you, gentlemen, and we'll celebrate the fact that you came, but we're starting this month tomorrow. We're not starting it today. It's in the hands of the rabbis to start the month, given that there are two possible days, whenever they like. And this was used for various purposes. So now let's say, take Pesach. Pesach, the 15th day of the month of Nisan, the rabbis determine when the month starts. And if so, they are determining which 24-hour period of the year, of history, will have the sanctity of the first day of Pesach. They're determining that. That's what's reflected, one of the things that's reflected in the change in the blessing. We say, Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Shabbos. Hashem sanctified the Sabbath. He makes it holy without any help from us, without any participation from us. Whereas all the other holidays, they get their holiness because we started the month. So we determine the dates. So we determine when that holiday will fall. That's why it's Yisrael v'Hazmanim. The Gemara's phraseology is Shabbos is Kviya v'Kaima. The Shabbos is established and continuing on its own independence, because the Kodesh Baruch Hu made it that way. And we, for the sake of the holidays, we have participated in creating the holidays. There's a lot that goes into that, but it's just a piece of background I think you should know. Okay, now he has a brief explanation of the various holidays of the year. Chametz, matzah, and the exodus from Egypt. And this that the fact which the Gemara mentions, and he mentions it here, that Kodesh Baruch Hu took us out, goy mikerav goy, one nation from the midst of another nation. The Talmudic analogy here is pregnancy. When the fetus is in the womb, all of its nourishment comes from its mother. When it's born, it's delivered from that condition. Here you have to appreciate the existence of the Jewish people in Egypt like a fetus in the womb of the mother. It's a pretty dramatic picture because the culture and values of Egypt are very, very far from the values of the Torah. And here the Jewish people is growing inside Egypt. Egypt providing it with its sustenance, its implements, its food, and yet they have to grow to become the people that will exit from Egypt and will receive the Torah at Sinai. It's almost a contradiction. It's almost an impossibility to understand such a thing. Now, that's why I can't read. I'm using the wrong glasses. No wonder I can't read the words. Okay. So he said, we've explained several times that the body is a physical thing, and the physical hides the presence of God. And now, one thing that the exodus from Egypt was supposed to do for the Jewish people was to purify the body. Not to destroy its physical character entirely, but to weaken its dependency on the physical, its orientation to the physical, its focus on the physical. And in order to do this, we were commanded to destroy chametz and to eat matzah. And now he makes the remark that I quoted a few days ago. You have to know that lechem, which, by the way, the word lechem in Hebrew can mean just food generally. The animal sacrifices in the temple were called lechem. But it also can mean bread. Leavened bread is good. Nothing wrong with it. It fits man's physical nature. It's good food. It's nourishing. And it also nourishes a person, one part of him, one part of that person being his evil inclination and his orientation towards the physical. That's where he should be in this world. But there's a particular time where, which the highest wisdom calculated, that the Jewish people should refrain from chametz and only eat matzah. To be minimizing the yetzer hara, the evil inclination, and the drive to the physical for that period of time, for 1 week. And to cause a strengthening in them for their connection to what is spiritual. But it's not possible to do this all the time, continuously. And the Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't want that in this world. But just the amount of time which the Torah specified for that purpose. Now, there's a gigantic literature on chametz and matzah. I just want to tell you one little thing. The law is that the very same grains, which if they leaven, become chametz, those same grains, if they don't leaven, become matzah, are what you can fulfill the mitzvah of matzah to do. So, in a certain sense, you could define matzah as frustrated chametz, something which, if left to its own devices, would become chametz, but baked in such a way that that doesn't happen. And when you will go to the matzah bakeries, which are a beautiful example of division of labor and efficiency and intelligent use of materials, from the time the water hits the flour to the time that the matzah comes out of the oven is about 11 minutes. I know you've heard of 18 minutes, but that's wrong. 18 minutes is how long you can use the implements for, but when you use the implements for 18 minutes, several batches go through. The average time is 11 or 12 minutes when the water hits the hot flour to the time it comes out fully baked from the oven. and it's being worked in the meantime, there's no chance that any of it will be chametz. Because it can't rise under those conditions. It doesn't rise when you're working it, and in such a short period of time, it doesn't. It's a completely unleavened bread. Now, having said that, it's the same grains, which isn't obvious. Rice will leaven, potato flour will leaven, other flour, maybe corn flour will leaven, but it's not chametz. Nor, if it's unleavened, would it count as matzah. Now, the Gaon of Vilna points out that if you look at the words chametz and matzah, you see the following connection. First of all, they share two letters. The mem and the tzadi are in both words, chametz and matzah. The difference is that the chametz has a ches and matzah has a hey. Now think of the shape of those letters. The ches is a three-sided figure, and the hey is almost the same. It just has on one side a little space. A little space. So it's like an L, and then with a separate piece which doesn't join to the L. Okay. Now, let's imagine the hay. Take that little piece where there's a space. Imagine that little piece expanding, growing, leavening, rising. That was one of the ways we described leavening the process. It rises, right? So you take that little piece and rise it. As it grows, it will join the roof and become a ches. That's a picture in the letters of the difference between chametz and matzah. Matzah is unleavened chametz. Matzah is where the little piece standing alone didn't rise up to join the roof and become a ches. Now, there's a message here. You could try this with someone who is comes from the wilds. Imagine a person who you hand him a loaf of bread, normal bread, everyday bread, the awful plain white bread. What is going to be his reaction? What is going to shock him when he takes the loaf of bread? What's going to shock him is how light it is. It's a fairly big object and it feels like nothing. You're right, it feels like nothing because it's mostly air. Take a slice of bread and squeeze it, you can squeeze it down to the size of a nickel or a thimble because it's mostly air. Not matzah. In matzah, what you see is what you get. It is what it appears to be. There's no difference between the appearance and reality. One of the messages here is, what is teva? What is so-called nature? The so-called laws of nature? The so-called features of nature? What is it? It presents a false appearance of being independent. Why is the world here today? Because it was here yesterday and nothing destroyed it in between. That's the way it naturally looks. It was something which you could call the inertia of existence. Inertia means something that's moving on its own. And according to Newton, its motion is just because it was moving and nothing disturbed it. No force makes it continue to move. Continued motion, constant motion, doesn't require a force. There's a lot to say about that in philosophy of science, but I'll skip that for now. Look at Tim Maudlin's work in philosophy of science. You'll see some very deep stuff there. So these things that exist, the table exists today because it was here yesterday and nothing disturbed it, and it wasn't burned up, it wasn't chopped up, it wasn't sold for firewood. It was here because it was here yesterday. Things carry on their own. That's a dreadful mistake. That's a dreadful mistake. The world is not like that at all. Mechadesh Tomid Ma'aseh Bereishis. We say it twice in the morning after Baruch Hu. God makes anew the work of creation continuously. There's a continuous flow of divine energy into the world that gives it its reality. Chametz presents a false picture of substance, which is mostly air. Matzah doesn't have any of that mistake. In matzah, you see what you see is what you get. So matzah teaches a tremendous lesson among 100 other lessons that it teaches. How to look at the natural world. Natural world has a false presentation of solidity, of substance, of independence, which we have to overcome. To learn to look at the world, what think of as natural occurrences, as a divine production, not something that carries on its own. One of the words that people use, which I think they don't think of the implications of it, so that from time to time God intervenes in history or intervenes in the world. I think that's at the best, it's a very misleading way to put it. To say to intervene means the thing's carrying on its own, and from time to time he causes certain changes to take place. But who says it's carrying on its own? Not our tradition. It's not carrying on its own. God doesn't go on vacation. He's managing and producing the events in the world moment by moment. And that's not something which is controversial. Even though people will tell you it's controversial, it's not controversial. Okay, so that's a little bit about matzah and Pesach. We've talked about freedom and other shiurim. I'm not going to repeat it here. Sukkot is related to the clouds of glory. The pasuk says you sit in the sukkah in order to know that I caused the Jewish people to dwell in sukkahs when I took them out of Egypt. There is a difference of opinion between two Tanoim. One says, when it says I'm telling you I caused them to dwell in sukkahs when I took them out of Egypt, it means physical sukkahs, makeshift walled and some kind of thatched roofing. The other said, no, it's a cloud of glory. It's a difference of opinion what that verse is talking about in the Gemara. In the Shulchan Aruch, there's actually a psak, and it's talking about the clouds of glory. So the commentators say, the Shulchan Aruch is a book of law and custom. It's a book of what to do and how to do it. This is almost unique in the whole of the Shulchan Aruch. Here it's telling you the meaning of a verse in the Torah, settling a disagreement about that among the Tanoim. Why is it doing that? And the answer is because here, one of the things you have to do on Sukkot is have the right thing in mind. It says, "Laman yedu dorasechem," so that your future generations shall know. What shall they know? If I shouldn't say the whole, if an aspect of the Sukkah that needs to be fulfilled is a knowledge that you have when you see the Sukkah, you need to know what you have to know because that's part of what the Sukkah is for. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins, that is the Anani HaKavod, the clouds of glory. Concerning this, there's a famous objection in the Torah where he says, when did we receive the clouds of glory? When we left Egypt. Well, if the holiday of Sukkot is dedicated to celebrating the fact that God gave us the clouds of glory, why isn't it in the spring when we left Egypt? That's when we got them. So the Torah has an answer, and the Gemara has another answer, both of which are very important to know. The Torah says, because if the celebration of the holiday is to move out of your home into the sukkah, well, the sukkah is much smaller, and it is makeshift, and the roof is permeable, has to be permeable, otherwise it's not kosher. So it's hot in Israel in the summer. Being in such a dwelling is a nice way to have relief from the heat. You're talking about a thatched roof, which allows penetration of air, circulation of air. And therefore, if you had the holiday of Sukkot in the spring, you would say he's moving into his summer dwelling, where it's comfortable for the summer. It wouldn't have any symbolic value. That's why you're told to do it in the fall. To which the naive observer says, have you ever been here in September? It's also hot in September, And he's telling you, oh, so now when I go out into the sukkah in September, nobody's going to say that I'm moving into my summer home. Why not? It's very hot in September. It's more comfortable in the sukkah than it is in the house in September. And the answer is obvious. Because if you're going to move into a summer home, you won't do it the last 3 weeks of the summer. You'll do it in the spring and enjoy it the whole summertime. If you do it in September, it's only because there's something symbolic about it. That's the idea of the tour, that you're doing it then because otherwise it wouldn't carry symbolic value. The Gaon of Vilna has a very, very striking analysis here. So we got the clouds of glory when we left Egypt, and we certainly did. What happened when we made the golden calf?
We lost.
Some Midrashim say we lost them. That was the middle of the summer, Tammuz. Made the golden calf. When did the clouds come back? Came back on the first day of Sukkot. That's when we recovered the clouds of glory. Now, Rav Hutner has a whole essay on the fact that there are two dimensions in which the Jewish people have lived historically, the dimension before the golden calf and dimension after the golden calf. In the 13 attributes of mercy, according to one way of explaining the text, the first two are two announcements of God's name, the four-letter name, and the Talmudic sages say, one, I am Hashem before a person sins, and I am Hashem after he sins and does tshuva. And the name with 4 letters is the name of creation. Says the Ramban, it's based on the root to be, is that God giving being to the world, which means that he did it twice, once before and once after. And therefore you have a different Torah before and after, and therefore you have different prayer there before and after. You have a different reality. The tablets that were brought down from the first time were broken by Moses. Came down afterwards on the second tablets after Yom Kippur, which is just before Sukkot. And in the Aron, in the Ark, you have the second tablets and the broken pieces of the first tablets, which didn't disappear. They didn't disappear. The relationship to the Torah is different. In the first tablets, they wouldn't have any forgetting. In the second tablets, there is forgetting. It would have been only 6 books, the 5 books of Moses and the book of Joshua. And now we have all the rest of the books of the Talmud, plus the oral tradition. There are 2 different realities. So Sukkot is in the spring, in the fall, because it celebrates the return of the clouds of glory, which are different clouds of glory. It's a different reality. We're living in that second reality. Post-transgression with tshuva, that's where we live. That's why the celebration of Sukkot is in the fall. That's when we got the clouds of glory back. This is something that's very, very deep there. Part of what the Gemara is explaining. Now, the Ramchal stresses the idea that the clouds of glory not only protected us in the wilderness, but they gave us a certain status which separated us from all the other nations of the world. They elevated us to a different nature of being. We've spoken about this in other contexts, that the clouds of glory physically served them exquisitely. The UVF rays, which would have given them sunburn and disease, were filtered out. And they created a comfortable climate all year round. And they flattened the terrain, so when they walked, they were always walking in a comfortable fashion. But it's not physical, it's not like creating physical comfort. There's a message. The message is that you are the purpose of creation, and since you are the purpose of creation, creation serves you. The second time they ran out of water, God said to Moses, "Speak to the rock, and the rock will give forth its waters." And the Chazal say The message is the rock will hear that the Jewish people is thirsty, it needs water. The rock has its own waters that it owns, it's part of its being. The rock hears that the Jewish people are thirsty, it says, to take my water. Why should the Jewish people be thirsty? Unlike the first time with the rock, where God said, they hit the rock, they were on such a low level that the rock says, the Jewish people are thirsty, let them die. Who cares? So you have to beat him up. Hitting him means he doesn't want to comply. You have to beat him up to get him to give his waters. Not here. Here, the Jewish people are on such a high level that by knowing. So that's the message. The message. The clouds of glory mean like in the Garden of Eden, when you didn't have any competition from the physical world, you didn't need any protection from the physical world. You were in an ideal physical environment because that's not where your effort and your attention should go, to the physical environment. That was the message that was given to them by the clouds of glory. And you're in an exquisite, special condition. Lo nitna Torah elo ochlei haman. The Torah was only given to those who ate manna, didn't plant, didn't harvest, didn't sow, didn't have to make bread, they didn't have to hunt animals and all the rest. It was something that was provided from heaven for them. Lechem abirim, the food that the angels eat, so to speak. So that was given to you also. You're moved out, you're separated from the necessity of the physical world. It's like having a portable Garden of Eden. That's what the clouds of glory gave them. It gave them a status. Now, we spoke about at the beginning of this Sefer that when Adam and Chava were kicked out of the Gan Eden, the whole world deteriorated. There's a long period of history, where someone had to arise to reconnect with the reality of Gan Eden. Reconnect. Only Abraham did it. Everyone could have done it. We spoke about that in detail. But the idea is to bring something of the Garden of Eden reality into this world, so that what was meant to be accomplished there could be accomplished here. And that's something which the Jewish people is supposed to play a role. Had they succeeded in receiving the Torah and not creating the golden calf, then they would have created a replay of Gan Eden in this world, almost word for word, because they would have been immortal. They failed, so there was another deterioration, but not a total one. Not a total one. The clouds of glory was what's expressed us. Yeah.
So is there a tafkid in this world to kind of continue the mission of Abraham and try to perfect creation?
Absolutely. I mean, the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, were setting up the conditions under which we could receive the Torah. So we are definitely living on the platform that they built for us. Mm-hmm. No question that it's a continuation of what they did. No question. Okay, we'll continue tomorrow.